Welcome to the Maryland Healthcare Commission's Healthcare AI Symposium. This presentation is part of a virtual symposium on the equitable, ethical, and responsible use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. The symposium features a range of presentations on AI risk management, from cybersecurity to AI-specific issues, including algorithmic bias, data integrity, and transparency. Visit the Maryland Healthcare Commission's website for more information. You can find a link to the Healthcare AI Symposium's webpage featuring all of the presentations in the description box below this video.
Hi and welcome. I'm Mac Benner with the Maryland Healthcare Commission. I'm happy to introduce our next presenter, Patrick Hall. Patrick is the principal scientist at Hall Research and faculty at the George Washington University School of Business. Patrick also conducts research supporting the National Institute of Standards and Technology's AI Risk Management Framework. He collaborates with AI risk advisory firms and serves on the board of the AI Incident Database, a tool designed to help us better imagine and anticipate AI risks. More on Patrick's extensive background auditing generative AI systems and developing responsible AI products is featured on this slide, and his presenter bio can also be found on MHCC's Healthcare AI Symposium webpage. Patrick, thanks so much for being part of MHCC's AI Symposium. I'll now hand it over to you to share some real-world AI incidents, the potential impact of AI technology, and how to evaluate claims on the accuracy of AI algorithms and the reliability of AI systems.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, that sounds great, and we'll just go ahead and dive in. So the title of my talk is A Survey of AI Incidents and Malpractice. Maybe perhaps a little bit of a different view of AI than you might have seen recently or more commonly. I hope so. I hope it'll be interesting. Yeah, and thank you so much to the Maryland Healthcare Commission for having me. And we'll just dive in. Okay, so this is actually a somewhat, this quote isn't from the last few years. It's Pedro Domingos is, I believe, an emeritus professor now. And, he's written a couple books. He has some political stances that I don't necessarily endorse. But I think this is a smart quote, and I think it, for now, describes the situation we're in with AI. I think, as usual, at any time there could be some amazing nonlinear jump in technology that no one expected. I don't think we've had one that changes the validity of this quote to date. So the basic idea here is, in my experience, people focus on the risk of AI being too smart, and kind of act like everyone isn't using AI. But the reality is that AI and computers are just kind of silly and get used in silly ways, and maybe don't have the capabilities that the people who are selling them and marketing them to us say they have. And the actual problems sort of arise from AI being used too much, too often, and it having lower capabilities than perhaps the people who are trying to sell it to us might want to admit. So I'll shut up and let you read the quote for a second, and then we'll move on. Okay, so I study and focus on and help organizations, government agencies, large organizations, including health insurers, implement sort of what I hope are realistic AI risk management policies and controls. And to build those kinds of policies and controls that do enable some amount of innovation, I think it takes a real familiarity with kind of the bad side of AI, the way that these systems fail and the way that people misuse them. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So first we'll get into the data that's available to describe how AI systems fail, and then we'll get into some of those common malpractices. All right. So there's no official, as in government sponsored, repository of AI incidents, like there might be for transportation incidents or medical device incidents, something like that. So there are a variety of smaller organizations that track these incidents, and the AI incident database with the website incidentdatabase.ai is one of those. It's one that I'm on the board of, and I think it's the best, of course, but there are others, and it's interesting that this is not a government-sponsored effort. I think that says a lot. That this has to be taken on by small nonprofits. So where we get our incident data is from journalism, basically. Occasionally, members of the public report directly to us, and if we can verify it, we sometimes keep it in the database. But generally speaking, we use journalism, and of course, that is a far from perfect source of data, but I think it's really the only real data that we have to try to analyze these incidents. So I've pulled a bunch of incidents. Obviously, you may have been reading them. And then I'm going to focus on a few of these incidents to try to highlight common failure modes and lessons that can be learned. And I would say another important aspect of this slide is that these are not generative AI incidents. Don't worry, those come next. These are incidents from sort of the more common type of AI, or the more common type of AI that people talked about before November 2022 and the whole generative AI hype cycle. So these are sort of pre-generative AI hype cycle incidents, and there were plenty of them, hundreds of them. The one that's sort of in the middle of the screen right now, Waze sent commuters toward California wildfires, drivers say, I think points at a really crucial issue with today's AI, that if you're using it in high stakes scenarios like medicine or healthcare, you'd really want to be aware of this kind of big problem that today's AI systems have. So today's AI systems aren't really without the help of humans and a lot of software engineering by humans. Today's AI systems aren't able to react to real world context. They have no method by which to do so. AI systems learn from digital data, and digital data only. They don't learn by smelling bad smells. They don't learn by falling in love and getting their heart broken. They don't learn by touching a hot stove. They don't learn by tasting things that taste good or bad. They have a very, very narrow view of the world that's limited to digital data. And oftentimes that view of the world is very static as well. So of course, software engineers can do things to update the data that goes into AI systems more frequently. We'll talk about the risk of that very soon. That's actually a fairly high risk way to use AI. And so many people just resort to training systems based on some snapshot of reality represented in digital data, and then the system has to operate off that static snapshot, until it's refreshed or redeployed or retrained or something like that. So what we see here is, and this is a general assumption and limitation of almost all, of AI or machine learning that would be available today. And so what we see on the screen is Waze sent commuters toward California wildfires, drivers say. Okay, so what happened here is mapping apps, and Waze wasn't the only one. Mapping apps got caught sending drivers into forest fires because there's no traffic in forest fires. Okay, so the AI or algorithmic system is designed to kind of optimize travel times. And one of the variables it looks at is, sort of traffic delays, traffic density. One of the variables it didn't look at apparently at the time was, is there a wildfire, where you're sending people? And so, I think this just points out that unless a human software engineer or data scientist or something thinks, oh my gosh, we have to remember about forest fires, the algorithmic driving system is perfectly happy to send you into a forest fire because it doesn't know about forest fires. It just knows that there's no traffic there. I'm sure this has been updated and fixed since this article came out years ago now in 2017, and no one was hurt, luckily. We are going to talk about AI incidents where people are hurt very shortly. No one was hurt in this case, and police caught people or highway patrol caught people before they actually drove into the fire. All right. This may be the most expensive AI incident ever. Zillow, facing big losses, quits flipping houses and will lay off a quarter of its staff. Okay, so the real estate tech company Zillow, you may be familiar with their Zestimate machine learning model for estimating house prices. They decided to use something related to that technology to try to buy homes automatically and then sell them for a profit, flip them, sell them for a profit. And it worked at first, and at first they were having human beings review the pricing that the machine learning model came up with, but that got kind of boring and tiresome and slow, and more money. There was more money to be made if they could flip more houses faster, and so they cut out the human review. At around the same time, the COVID pandemic was really taking hold. Serious logistical hiccups in supply chains were occurring, and real estate prices were inflating more quickly than perhaps their machine learning could keep up with. And at some point, they found themselves buying way too many houses for way too low of prices, unable to manage the logistics of flipping these houses, and unable to account for the high inflation in house prices. And they had a $500 million cash loss, huge market cap loss, huge layoffs. And I think the main issue here is the main lesson from this one. It may sound like a bad model or something like that. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's a case of a lack of governance. There's always going to be a temptation to try to make as much money as possible with AI or machine learning and to go fast and break things. And this is what happens when you do that, when you're buying and flipping thousands of houses. You can lose a lot of money and have to lay a lot of people off. Okay. This incident, I didn't hear about it at the time, and to me it's shocking. So back in 2021, the government of the Netherlands, a contemporary, wealthy European democracy, the entire cabinet and prime minister had to step down because of a tax scandal, and that was in at least in part due to kind of an algorithmic issue. Okay, tens of thousands of families were accused of tax fraud by an algorithm incorrectly, and as is not uncommonly the case, many of the wrongly accused were from minority or sort of historically marginalized social groups. And it was such a blaring mistake at such a large scale that really, it just caught up to the government and bit them. They had nothing, they couldn't defend themselves, they had to step down. So an entire government, prime minister and cabinet, a contemporary wealthy European democracy has had to step down because of mistakes with machine learning or AI systems, algorithmic systems. Okay, this is the one where people do get hurt. And I believe this incident was ongoing for decades, and it's just now being resolved. So this is the Fujitsu Horizons incident, or I can't remember if it's Horizon or Horizons. It's a fraud detection software. Again, be very careful with fraud detection software. And for some reason, sort of culturally, when this system was first implemented, if it flagged someone for fraud, they were almost fast-tracked for prison. Something about the culture of the times, if a computer system in the 1980s or 90s said you committed fraud, your management was convinced, the criminal justice system was convinced, and many people were sort of wrongly accused of fraud, had their careers ruined, went to prison. There were suicides because these were assistant postmasters, things like that. It was in the British Postal Service, and it was really sort of mid-level bureaucrats, just totally normal people with families who would never think about something like this, never think about stealing from their job or something like that. They get accused of stealing and then fast-tracked to prison or career ruin. And again, there were suicides, there were lives ruined, and it's just today, just now in the 2020s that we're beginning to really reckon with what happened with this computer system. So AI used for decision making can fail, it can be abused, it can be misused. Even if you get all the math and data right, which is hard enough, you have to get the human factors right as well. And that's brutally difficult sometimes, and especially in high stakes use cases. All right, here's the generative AI edition. I think for some people out there, like for me, generative models are an old and boring thing. People have been working with, generative models for decades. It's funny to me that this is now a buzzword, but I think for some people, just the term generative AI kind of means like new and better AI. No, it's just a different kind. And a kind that people in the field have been working with for quite some time before this anyway. Okay, so again, I'll let you read some of these. Here, people do get emotionally involved with chatbots. It's called the Eliza effect, dating back to the first chatbot in 1966. Just plenty of problems with generative AI too. It's hard to know if, generative AI has certainly vastly increased the sort of popular discourse and use of AI, and it's hard to know if we're seeing more incidents now because AI is simply being used more, or if generative AI actually maybe fails more than past types of AI. We don't know, and we can't tell from this data. I really want to concentrate on these two anthropomorphized chatbots. But some of the things that you may have seen in the background, there's misuse of these generative AI systems, sort of using ChatGPT in scenarios where you should really do the work yourself. There's massive issues with intellectual property, the sort of use and abuse of others' intellectual property, issues detecting AI-generated content. And I think a question that really needs to be asked of the vendors is why they would release these technologies without any way of tracking AI-generated content. Our information ecosystem is being destroyed. There's issues with just being wrong, hallucination or confabulation, just the systems saying wrong things. But what I want to highlight here is we see three sort of younger woman cartoonish faces on the screen. This is the two I want to focus on that I know the most about are these two. So this is Tay from Microsoft Research in 2016, and this is Lee Luda from a South Korean company called Scatter Labs that was deployed on the South Korean kind of social media and chat app Kakao in 2021. So 5 years later. So, and again, across all three of these, right, there's kind of this striking younger female look. I don't think this is any coincidence. It's from other, I could give a talk about bug bounties of AI systems, and from the initial there was an initial sort of testing by a global population of people of an algorithm from Twitter years ago that showed that the internet has a preference for sort of younger, whiter, more female images. So I think there's no coincidence that that's what these organizations pick to represent their chatbots. When you put a human face, even if it's a cartoon on a chatbot, that's an instance of anthropomorphization, treating the AI system like it's human. Generally speaking, that's seen as a bad outcome in risk management, because the more you humanize the AI system, the more people might feel like it has human intelligence capabilities. And whether you think the chatbots are smart or not, it's not a human intelligence. And I don't think you want the users to be confused between whatever type of intelligence chatbots turn out to be and human intelligence. I think, for me, very clearly today, as we sit here in 2025, the chatbots are not up to human levels of intelligence. And so you set up this scenario where the person may expect and see sort of higher performance than what's actually there. You also prime the person for an emotional response. And people, as discussed before, people have very strong emotional responses: falling in love, suicide, just the strongest possible emotional responses to chatbots, and have sort of since 1966. And from a risk management perspective, people having strong emotions with a computer system, that's just a very risky variable that we don't want to introduce into our organization. But nonetheless, these chatbots are anthropomorphized as young women. And Tay was back in 2016. Tay was put up by Microsoft Research, an organization that I would be flattered to work for, an organization that's a leading organization in responsible AI and AI in general, an organization with massive resources, an organization with some of the smartest people in AI. So they put this chatbot up on the internet for people to interact with on Twitter. And I said that machine learning systems are often trained on snapshots of data, and when data changes away from that snapshot, they don't work as well. Well, the makers of Tay actually tried to take this problem on, and they used something called adaptive or online learning, where people would tweet at Tay, and then Tay would incorporate that information into its training data and update itself very quickly. What this sets up is what's known as data poisoning. So Twitter users very quickly found out they could manipulate the inputs to Tay to manipulate the outputs to Tay. And I believe it was about 16 hours and 92,000 tweets into this, Tay became kind of a constant stream of pornographic and neo-Nazi material and had to be taken down. So there's so much we can. Tay is almost the prototypical AI incident. So there's many lessons we can learn here. One, if it can happen to Microsoft Research, it can happen to anybody. They have everything they need to not have this happen, and yet it still happens. Two, there's the scale and the speed. I don't think many people can tweet 92,000 times in 16 hours or whatever it is. Let's just say 90,000 times in a day. There's the kind of complexity of the incident starting out as what I would call machine learning security issue. So these adaptive algorithms are manipulatable, right? Because I can affect the data that goes into them to affect change in the data that comes out of them. And we would kind of consider that a security issue from a machine learning perspective. So we had this security issue that morphed into a toxicity and bias issue over the 16-hour time span. So Tay, there's a lot to learn from Tay. There's a lot to learn from Tay. But guess who didn't learn it? The makers of Lee Luda. So Lee Luda comes along 5 years later. Nice young female cartoonish looking face, just like Tay, put out on a social media app to just chat with people and get people excited about how cool AI is or something, just like Tay. And then ends up insulting and demeaning people just like Tay. Okay, so repeat incidents. We are in the time of AI. Like if you think about the history of aviation, airplanes used to fly into mountains over and over and over again. That's where we are in the maturity of AI. People are not even trying to not repeat incidents. Um, so Lee Luda is essentially a repeat incident of Tay. There's many, well, I shouldn't say many, but multiple repeat incidents in the AI incident database. And the whole point of collecting incidents is not to repeat failures. And so I hope that when you or your organization goes to build an AI system, one of the first things you should do is look at past known failures, and try not to repeat them. And in fact, I will say quickly, out of Northwestern University and an organization called CASME, there is a very high interest in setting up, sort of specific medical incident databases or sort of medical incident reporting capability. And if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to me. I forgot to say one before I move on. Lee Luda did have kind of a unique twist, which is that the developers rushed it to production so quickly they didn't scrub people's personal information from the training data. So it was insulting people like Tay, but it was also handing out people's personal data on the internet. So just all kinds of good lessons to learn here. All right, so that's your primer on AI incidents. They are going up over time. That shouldn't be surprising. We have no denominator here. We have no way to standardize this. We don't know if from a benchmark things are getting worse or better. We just know that the number of AI incidents is going up over time, which is basically expected because the use of AI is probably going up over time.
Patrick,
Yeah,
your
please.
work with the incident database is very interesting, and certainly also this increase in incidents over time that you've noted. When we think about the available AI incident data today, how is public perception of AI changing in general? And more specifically, what is the perception of AI applications in healthcare?
I would say that in general, I think that the public is tuned out from AI failures for the most part. I think they hear about them sometimes on the news or probably experience, some minor inconveniences when AI systems don't work. I would say that, generally the public seems pretty accepting of bad AI, just to be bluntly honest from my perspective. And it's very, it's a very complex topic. It's really hard to educate people about, what they should expect from AI systems. I think on the medical side, things are different. I think as in every industry, there's sort of crushing hype right now to adopt, especially generative AI, which I think generative AI may actually make less sense to use in high stakes environments than sort of I don't want to say older because generative models go back a very long time. The type of AI that was sort of overhyped before generative AI was overhyped. So I think there's a lot of hype in medicine. I think that probably practitioners are experiencing this as well. And I think a lot of medical practitioners, in my experience, are skeptical. My advice would be to stay skeptical. Don't forget about the scientific method. Don't forget about design of experiment. test these systems the way you would any other software or tool, and you'll see the results that you see, which will be sometimes good and sometimes bad. So I think that in general, the public is kind of accepting of any kind of AI that comes over the fence from big tech companies. But I think, and I think there's a huge amount of hype in medicine around the use of AI, but I do think that people on the ground, and to a certain extent, that's me, not in medicine. I tend to do more legal expert work in financial services, but again, like I have to be right, or try to be right, and much like I think medical practitioners would. And when when it's your hands on the keyboard and you have to be right, I think that it's kind of obvious that these systems aren't ready sometimes. And so I think there is kind of a higher level of skepticism in practitioners in these high stake areas, which is good. Stay skeptical.
Thank you.
Yep, very welcome. Okay, so here's, to try to get a better overview than just a bunch of headlines thrown up on slides. What are some of the clusters of AI incidents that we see? Well, there's a big cluster for self-driving vehicles. I don't know what else to say about that. There, oof. If AI systems have a hard time adapting to context, then self-driving is going to be a very difficult problem. I'm not sure what else to say about it. You know, there have been flash crashes, there have been, public transportation incidents, there's been hacks, and the way we've tried to arrange these incidents is whether they're sort of targeted or broad, and then digital or physical. All right. Kind of moving through time, what these clusters are. They're a major type of incident, and something that I think people in medicine should be very cautious about is systemic bias in these AI systems. So the first years of the AI incident database were all about manifestations of systemic bias in AI systems, and you may see videos about that in this conference. You may have heard about it, and that arises from not just data. Okay, yes, we record a lot of our own biases in data, and then systems learn from that. Please also remember it comes from human design decisions and human usage decisions around the AI system as well. And these AI systems tend to be developed by groups of highly insular, highly homogeneous people, young male engineers that don't get out much. Would be a nice way to describe it. And that having only that perspective design an AI system leads to a lot of blind spots. Okay. Now we start to see, some of the first chatbots arise, and how they're, they basically didn't work at all at first, and yet they were being sold. We see, major issues with moderation on social media. And then once we get to 2022, ChatGPT appears, and almost all the incidents sort of turn to chatbot flubs, chatbot mistakes. And then also a huge, what we're tracking right now is a huge amount of scams, and people are hurt emotionally and physically in these scams. So now what we're seeing a ton of in the AI incident database is people using generative AI. Remember, I said I think a question that really needs to be asked of the vendors is, why were these systems released with no way to understand if the data they made was made by an AI system? So now bad actors are using these generative AI systems to make images, video, text, voices, and scamming people all around the world. Multiple, the FBI has put out bulletins about this. Multiple international scams where many people are hurt with generative AI. That's the new theme at the AI incident database. Okay,
Patrick,
so you
I think
know,
before we
yeah,
get
please,
into
please,
this,
yeah.
before we get into this next section, as
Hmm.
you probably know, HIPAA requires that a breach be reported to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Right.
And analysis of this breach data helps to identify weaknesses in healthcare cybersecurity. Can healthcare related incidents be submitted to the AI incident database?
Yes, definitely. And again, I would say that we're working with Northwestern University to build that out. And if there are other people out there that want to do this, I think it's a great idea. I think getting back to your earlier question, which was a good question, generally speaking, I don't think the public cares yet. And I think it's going to take many years, if not decades, for the general public to get educated on these issues. However, I do think doctors, nurses, healthcare practitioners, are generally highly educated people who care about their work. And I do think that they care and notice when these systems go wrong. And moreover, there's regulatory, legal, and moral, ethical motivation to be right in your work here. I think that I wish, I did my tour in Silicon Valley, and I wish what people understand about Silicon Valley, I think people think of it as this like place where a bunch of super geniuses are building the future. Um, I would I would say that you could describe it as a place where a bunch of kids are cranking out slop. And that's not going to work in medicine. And I think that places like medicine and law are good places where people would care about incidents, learn from incidents, and I'm hopeful that that's one of the first places where we might get the public or population, certain parts of the public, like doctors and attorneys, reporting incidents directly. And again, there's interest in that out of Northwestern Medical School and Northwestern University Computer Science Department. So I'd love to chat in with anyone about that.
What are your thoughts on how healthcare organizations can use this AI incident database to better understand and anticipate AI risks?
Sure. Just the basic key is to research past incidents to not repeat them. So if you are building an AI system, you should check when you're in the design phase, you shouldn't just rush into coding. When you're in the design phase, um, you should compare what you're doing to past known failures and not repeat those past known failures. There are a lot of other lessons, but if people are only going to take one lesson away, that would be the one. Don't repeat past failures. Use the incident database to not repeat past failures.
Thank you. Thinking more about this data and how it clusters, in general, what more is needed to better understand AI trends and how to use this data to inform AI development?
That's a really good question, and this data is available. So you can go to instantdatabase.ai and download snapshots of this all this data that we're showing, and that's how this is generated. I think when you get this data, it is a little bit, just to be honest, I think it's a little bit disappointing because um, the journalism only goes so far. The journalism rarely contains information related to cost or exactly what went wrong or exactly who was harmed. Um, Journalism, of course, has all kinds of biases on its own. So I think that what we need here is, this is what we have. It's biased, it's incomplete, but it's what we have. What we need is what we have probably in transportation, and I assume there's something similar for medical devices, where there is a fully funded government effort to track these things in sort of a public, highly transparent, highly structured, very rich database where people can do this. Where people can really learn more about AI incidents. So I think what we're missing from in the AI incident database today is like the structured data, the money, the people, the names, um, and journalism has biases, well known, well understood, and all this data is subject to those biases. So getting more direct reports from sort of professional incident reporters would be incredible, and I think we're honestly quite a ways away from that. The current politics in the United States sort of precludes the government getting involved in tracking AI incidents, sadly.
Thank you.
Okay. So, how do I think about all these risks that, I've seen and I've worked with companies on and I've studied. Um, okay, so there's hype around kind of the performance of AI, and then there's hype around the risk of AI. Okay, so let's talk about the hype around the risk of AI first. For some reason, it's become very in vogue for makers of AI systems to, talk about how dangerous their AI systems are, how intelligent they already are. They're going to accelerate. They're going to, their learning is going to accelerate on its own. They're going to acquire resources. They're going to avoid being shut down. They have these emergent capabilities. They can do things they're not trained to do. They're going to replicate themselves. Um, as far as I can tell, every claim related to these risks is poisoned by conflict of interest. The people that are saying these things about how risky their system are either directly selling the system or directly funded by people who are selling the systems. Um, they're also backed up by anecdotal measurement, not scientific measurement. So I would say that as of today, again, things could change. There could be some real giant breakthrough with artificial intelligence happening somewhere, that we don't know about. But as of today, with ChatGPT and being kind of like the top line of AI, these things aren't real. So I don't think organizations should be worrying about them yet. Nonetheless, there are very scary big risks with AI, and I'll point out that they are to our democracy. Um, AI is great at surveillance. AI is great at, potentially monitoring and changing people's behavior. AI is great at producing disinformation. So between surveillance, disinformation that affects our decision making and voting capabilities, and credit scoring, or and perhaps worse, social credit scoring, computer systems are monitoring our behavior, influencing our behavior, and in ways that are potentially risky for our democratic institutions. There's also, issues with youth well-being or even adult well-being when it comes to AI and algorithms and social media. There is issues, and this comes straight from the vendors themselves. I mean, I do think it's a bit of this kind of critter hype, but the makers of themselves, along with putting these systems out into the world with no way to identify that the data was AI generated, they're like, oh, by the way, maybe they could also be used to proliferate bioweapons and nuclear weapons too. So um, we're in a very strange time with AI. I think there are overhyped big risks. I think there are underhyped big risks, but I think these are the risks that companies or organizations should really be worried about. Just general abuse and misuse of the tools, automation complacency. The FDA SAMD, software as medical devices, gets into this. I think they call it automation bias. NIST calls it automation complacency. People are not good at vigilance tasks, and if people's jobs are just to check what some AI system does, they're not going to do a good job at it. There's huge data privacy issues with collecting all this training data, selling the training data, selling data to other AI vendors. There's plenty of issues with performance and errors. There's huge issues with intellectual property. How do you know that what a chatbot or image generator is generating isn't just some memorized property of someone else? You don't know. There is there's issues with systemic bias still. There have been multiple reports of child sexual abuse material being used to train AI systems. There's security issues. There's workforce displacement issues. So I think these are the real risk. And, how do you manage them? Another sort of line that's common in the AI space is it's so new, no one knows how to govern it. No, that's wrong. The United States federal government has been regulating algorithms for decades. The FDA has been regulating algorithms for a long time. Federal banking regulators have what is probably the most mature and thorough way of governing algorithms called model risk management. And any of that can be used to govern these algorithms. It's just not fun or cool or new. But there are ways to govern these algorithms, highly effective ways to govern these algorithms.
Patrick,
All right. Yeah, sure.
you've made a great point about the need to identify harms and prioritize risks. As healthcare organizations shift to establish an appropriate risk tolerance in this transition from experimentation to operational AI, what practical strategies are essential to help these healthcare organizations develop and deploy responsible AI solutions? And what processes should be in place to ensure that this deployment is consistent with an organization's policies and legal and regulatory obligations?
All right. Great question. Can't answer it all. I do a lot of work in ensuring AI systems are able to comply with complex regulation. The basic answer is go read what's called SR 11-7. The supervisory and regulatory letter 11-7 from the Federal Reserve. I believe that means the seventh supervisory and regulatory letter from the year 2011. It's called the Interagency Guidance on Model Risk Management, and it lays out that very thorough way to govern AI systems. It's the smartest thing anybody's ever written on AI risk management by a long shot, in my opinion, and I'm an author of the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. I do think NIST will get there, and I think what NIST has done is really good and really revolutionary in its own ways. They treated a lot broader spectrum of risk than the bankers did. But the banking government AI governance and model governance stuff is very mature. They've been working on it for going on, over 15 years now. And so I would say go read SR 11-7. And what it really harps on, and I don't want to shock anyone here, is human accountability. You have to make humans accountable for the mistakes that computers make, because computers don't make mistakes on their own. AI systems aren't smart enough today to make mistakes on their own. People have to put them in place to make those mistakes, and you have to make people accountable for that. So it's just about human accountability. And I think, again, some big tech companies notoriously have blame-free cultures, and I think there's a reason for that. It's where you actually have to be right, law, medicine, aviation, where you see more real governance of these systems, and the governance tends to make humans responsible for what the machines do. And I think that's still right as of today.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so maybe we'll do one more slide and wrap it up for you. Does that sound good on the MHCC side, or should we keep going for a couple more slides?
You're free to keep going for a couple more slides.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is how I deal with claims about AI. It's actually pretty easy. So here's my anti-hype questionnaire for beginners when it comes to AI. So is the term magic being used? And one of my favorite things to do is go to conferences and see how many times more in the conference materials magic is used than risk is used. There's nothing magic about AI or any technology. It's just, super complicated stuff that humans put together in ways that are hard for other humans to understand. That's not magic. Okay, so magic is not real. If people are talking about magic, I think that's a really bad sign in the medical field. The magic one, comes up maybe 5% of the time. The next one comes up maybe 80% of the time, maybe 90% of the time. All right, so if you listen carefully and look carefully, almost everyone that's saying AI is amazing is selling it to you. And almost everyone saying AI is going to kill us today is funded by someone who's selling it. So check conflicts of interest, right? It seems funny to say this in 2025 when it seems like no one cares about conflicts of interest anymore, but there are major conflicts of interest when it comes to the marketing and implementation of AI. And I don't understand why we're taking vendors' words for it, when they're presenting us with sort of half-hearted, often anecdotal measurement and saying this thing is great. This is why we need independent science and government science to verify these things. But generally speaking, if you look into who's saying AI is great, it's people who are selling it. All right. Here's another one that comes up all the time. If it's free, they are selling your data. Okay, nothing's free. No one in the AI world does anything just to be good or just to be cool. It's a big, dirty business like everything else. If the system is free, they're selling your data. Probably for things you don't want them to sell it for. All right. I didn't grow up in AI world. I grew up in chemistry world. I was trained to be a physical chemist. Assumptions and limitations are part of good science. There's nothing in science that doesn't have assumptions and limitations, except commercial AI systems. And so if people aren't being clear and forthcoming about their assumptions and limitations, and whatever they're saying is just too good to be true. And then, is the claim peer reviewed? Many of the most important, most cited AI papers are preprints. If you don't know what that means, it means someone just put it on a website where almost anyone can put almost anything and just left it there and people went crazy. I'm not saying that some of that work isn't incredible work. Some of it is incredible, but I think it's notable that many of the biggest papers in AI today have never been peer reviewed. They've just been simply put on the internet. And generally many claims about AI are not peer reviewed. If something isn't peer reviewed, it can still be true, but it hasn't undergone the level of scrutiny that you want it to like build a company or an industry off of it, let's say. So in general, like if we're just talking about information from social media and podcasts, which it seems like that's where people like to get information now, even policymakers, it can just be pure disinformation, right? Peer review is a check against pure disinformation in many cases, not all, sadly. So anyway, there's a huge issue with just the scholarship in AI and how it's reviewed. All right, now another one this is where I get my colleagues. Elections, we talk about margins of error. Whenever a number matters, I think people get that it can be estimated and needs a margin of error around it. Very oftentimes when people tell you about the performance of AI systems, there aren't margins of error. Okay, so people need to acknowledge that results may vary, that there's a margin of error here. You need, if you're looking at technical results, you need to be seeing confidence intervals, you need to be seeing standard errors. And if you're not, if you're a doctor, or some kind of, if you have scientific training and you're reading a document about a technical system and there's a bunch of numbers and none of them have confidence intervals or standard errors or margins of errors, that's just a big red flag that what's going on here. These are statistical systems. By nature, their results will fluctuate. And if the people that are selling them to you aren't being forthcoming about that, I think that's a major ethical and scientific issue. So this is how I handle AI claims, and this is why I'm so skeptical about AI. Very few claims about AI can make it through this little questionnaire.
Patrick, this
Yep.
information on assessing AI claims is very interesting. As I think about healthcare organizations, before investing in AI technology, what are some key questions that these organizations should be minimally asking a potential vendor?
That's a good question. I mean, besides what's here, I would say another one that I watch out for all the time is if people are making claims of, no social bias, no systemic bias, bias is eliminated. That's not possible. So that's another that's another sort of common AI marketing point is, our objective system eliminates all bias. That's not possible. And so again, if your vendors are saying that, that's a big red flag. Here, when banks build AI systems, they actually try to think about, will it make money? They actually try to estimate the cost to build and use the AI system and the money it's going to bring in. When you're a bank and you're working in pure dollars and cents, that calculation is easier. But I think if other types of companies, and in particular healthcare companies, would engage in this basic kind of due diligence, not even asking, I'm not even saying you need to ask tough ethical questions or things like that. Just ask the boring business question. Do we know that this is going to make money? And I would say that that's another good one for companies to ask is try to get an estimate of what it's going to cost to build and use this thing and put that up against the number, of what you're likely to get, the return on your investment, and see if one number is bigger than the other number. And I think that basic due diligence would actually cut out a lot of sort of crappy AI as well. I think people rush into AI assuming they're going to make lots of money. That the big tech companies make all the money. You don't make the money. Okay. So yeah, just think about whether you're going to make money or not.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. I'll do one or two more here. I'm okay on time. If you all are, please tell me when we need to wrap things up. Okay, so getting into more advanced, potentially sort of harder to understand, but very concerning issues with how people talk about AI. One thing that comes to the top of the list is called task contamination. Okay, so when we train AI systems, a very, very important part of the process is holding out some realistic data that's never used for anything except to get an honest assessment of the system's performance. There's a new idea out there in AI world, which is instead of having that, and you have the holdout data, but instead of not using it for anything besides getting an honest assessment of the system's performance, what if we just train on that data? What if we just incorporate that data into what, into what we're learning about? And then, our results on benchmarks and other test statistics look so much better, okay? This is just like stealing an exam key and memorizing it prior to your exam. Okay, it's just cheating. And why this happens is we have all these kind of silly numeric benchmarks out there about AI performance. Some of them are well designed and maybe informative. Many of them are just numbers. And so, people are using these benchmarks to decide whether they're going to buy AI systems, and it's hard for the companies to resist the commercial pressure to cheat on those benchmarks. And there's multiple academic papers about this, actual peer-reviewed academic papers about this. And then it can also just happen unintentionally, right? When your training data is like all the digital data in the world, it can be, you might lose track of some of it, right? And so I would say that maybe, task contamination, when it happens, sometimes it's not intentional, it's unintentional, it just happens because there's a lot of data and people find it hard to keep track of it. So when people are talking about, oh, look, we did this well on this benchmark, what needs to go through your mind is, well, did you train on the benchmark? Did you cheat? And unfortunately, this is just a real thing that's going on out there in AI world. So if companies are coming at you with benchmark results, you should ask them about task contamination, and very likely they will only have an evasive answer. Some may not. Some may claim on being able to decontaminate the benchmarks and things like that. I'm just not sure what's true. And the only way to really know whether task contamination is influencing an AI system's performance is to see all the training data. Companies are very guarded about their training data, and I would allege that this is one reason why. All right, so about those big benchmarks, people love to call them evals. There's a lot of fun stuff in AI. We shorten existential risk to X risk. That's fun. We shorten evaluation to evals. It's all fun. So And here we have the former president of OpenAI, someone who probably has a lot of OpenAI stock, saying that evals are all you need to measure these systems. So evals are the benchmarks that I was talking about. Benchmarks of benchmarks, data sets, formulas, numbers, and just hundreds or thousands of them all thrown together. So there are these massive batteries of computational tests. They're based on, test data that graduate students or people who are paid very little money, to put together make. Sometimes we just see how ChatGPT does on the bar or other human licensing exams, even though, there's no real clear reason that those are good AI system evaluation tools. Even if you thought these benchmarks were done correctly, they're just focusing on performance in test data, not in silico versus in situ. I think a lot of people watching this presentation might care about in situ risk more than in silico risk, right? We care about what's going on in the world of the living, and not as much about how something does inside a computer. Again, these are plagued by conflicts of interest. They're all introduced by vendors who have something to sell to you and also happen to do very well on the benchmarks they've invented. There's the issues with task contamination that we just talked about. Many of the benchmarks test very questionable capabilities in these systems, such as self-awareness, emotional understanding. Computers don't have self-awareness or emotional understanding. This is like me. This is like me saying, "Hey, I've put together a human flight benchmark. Right now, my sad 45-year-old legs could jump like 8 inches in the air. But by next year, I'll be flying all over the place." Okay, so when we see benchmarks for self-awareness and emotional understanding, I call those the human flight benchmarks. Okay, so it's literally like this is never going to happen or never going to happen with anything like the current set of technology that we have. But yet I make a benchmark for it, put numbers on it, and say, well, we'll do better in the future. That's not operating in good faith. And of course, there's huge problems with standardization and consistency and measurement of variance and reproducibility in these benchmarks. And these benchmarks are the tools that more technical people are using to say, hey, these systems are great. Organizations like the Department of Defense and NIST are trying to do scientific measurement on these systems, which is very difficult. And that is what's totally new. So we have a lot of unscientific sort of playing with numbers over here. Here we have, a handful of people and a handful of big research groups. So Microsoft, DeepMind, NIST, DoD, these are the organizations that I'm aware of who are actually trying to apply the scientific method and do structured experiments and real world experiments on how these systems perform. And there's not much data available about that yet. There's lots of data, there's lots of numbers, but there's much less data from real structured objective experiments about these systems in the real world. That data is yet to come. Okay, another thing on these evals, and again, if you start looking into these generative AI systems, you'll hear about evals and benchmark statistics all the time. There's a general phenomenon known as Goodhart's law that says once a metric is something that people want to do better on, it can no longer be a good metric because people will optimize towards that metric and fully forget that that metric is probably just a proxy for something in the real world that we actually care about. And performance in the real world for the thing that we care about can get worse and worse and worse, while optimization on this specific metric gets better and better and better. And this doesn't just happen in machine learning and AI. It happens anytime we attempt to do measurement. And the only way to counteract this that I'm aware of is talking to your users, right? And some of the companies do an okay job of that, getting feedback from their users. But it's unclear to me if they're using the feedback from their users to test their systems and calibrate their metrics, or if they're using the feedback from their systems just for sort of pure performance and maybe, selling the feedback to others, that type of thing. So just remember Goodhart's law. And anytime a group of people start focusing on metrics, They can lose focus on what's actually happening in the real world. The thing in the real world can get worse as the metrics are getting better and better. All right, and then finally, yeah, that's the end. I'll be really quick here. Again, I've done my time, right? Like, why do I feel comfortable saying these things? I've seen all of this, right? And I've done both. I've done both of these. So just keep in mind that, like, your average AI vendor out there isn't scrupulously applying the scientific method, okay? They're assuming they're going to make a lot of money. They're all teched up on GPUs and Python. They get whatever data they can get their hands on, not appropriate data, available data. And then, I would just say that the basic premise, the basic setup of data science that I've seen throughout my career is go get data. In that data, find a problem that will solve and make money. I would argue that's a violation of the scientific method just to get going, right? You're supposed to have a hypothesis and then go get data, not get data, have a hypothesis, use that same data to confirm the hypothesis, and then claim success. Okay, so I would say that what I just said, going and getting some data, finding a hypothesis in that data, using that same data to confirm the hypothesis is both a grave violation of the scientific method and standard operating procedure for training AI systems. And there are ways to apply the AI, the scientific method in AI and machine learning, and I think we're really in the early stages of that. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of resources and people to set up sort of structured experiments with human subjects to do this. And so it's really only the biggest players, like I said, Microsoft, DeepMind, NIST, Department of Defense, that we see doing more scientific measurement of AI system. So the last thing I'll say here is all the stuff you've heard about AI, very likely anecdotal, very likely plagued by these issues that I discussed with evals, task contamination, Goodhart's law, lack of scientific measurement. The processes by which the system are made are oftentimes almost anti-scientific, and we are really just in the beginning phases of applying the scientific method and applying scientific measurement principles to AI performance. And there's not much data out there in terms of how these systems perform under what we would consider sort of classic experimental setups. So I've talked for a long time. I really appreciate your attention, and if you want to look into the references, here you go. And happy if there's more interest on the MHCC side to take some questions, or we can just be done now. However you'd like to do it.
Thank you, Patrick. As you've come to the end of your presentation, thinking about the information you've provided, I think about how in healthcare, the rapid development of AI has outpaced standards and regulatory frameworks. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how this is affecting or how this can affect AI development.
Yeah, I think, it's sort of the theme that we've been talking about in the last half of the presentation. The default in AI, it comes from Mark Zuckerberg, is move fast and break things. Moreover, that's sort of the cultural default. Moreover, there's tremendous commercial pressure, right? There is a lot of money to be made here. And, I'm chuckling because I think about my career choices and, why I left Silicon Valley to become kind of a outsider and critic of these things. There's a lot of money to be made, right? So there's a ton of commercial pressure. So we have this move fast, go fast and break things. These stereotypically sort of insular groups of young male technicians designing the systems, and you mix that with incredible market pressure, and yeah, that's why we have all these incidents, right? And the key is the only thing that I'm aware of that pushes back on the market pressure and the move fast and break things culture is regulation. Right. And so without that regulation, it's and I mean, I think the FDA has done a good job. I've worked in that space a little bit. I'm not an expert on it. I've seen it. I think that the FDA has done a good job with the software as a medical device guidelines. So I wouldn't say there's no, there's HIPAA as well. I wouldn't say there's no regulation, but there's no specific regulation about AI. And without that, you cannot, how in an organization that's there to make money, how can you push back on market pressure without regulation? I just don't know how. So yeah, we're in the move fast, break things, Wild West days, and we will just be there until there's regulation, and that could take quite a long time. I'll say that what I was chuckling back and thinking about leaving Silicon Valley. I left Silicon Valley in 2019, 2020, because I was convinced that AI would be regulated. Within 5 years, let's say. After that, the first 5 years of me expecting AI regulation, I would say we're further away from it than we've ever been. So I think we're quite a long ways from AI regulation, unless some really, really horrible, massive incident happens. And please remember, when some really, really horrible, massive incident happens, the most likely scenario is the tech companies get bailed out. We have to work with our elected representatives to make sure that's not the case. So we're just a very long way from regulation, sadly, in my opinion. And that's what's going to push back on the market pressure. And until then, it's going to be move fast and break things. And sadly, it's going to be up to individual practitioners to do the risk management, which is very unfair and very ineffective, but that's the reality that we live in.
Thank you, Patrick. To
Thank
conclude
you.
this presentation, I'd like to thank you for this great discussion. And again, thank you for participating in the Maryland Healthcare Commission's Healthcare AI Symposium series.
My
That,
pleasure.
that concludes this presentation. To view more presentations, please visit the AI Symposium webpage on the Maryland Healthcare Commission's website.